Welcome. It's Saturday, the 20th of July, and this is the fourth episode of the Wi-Fi Chats. That is the Wise-Mind Fireside Chats. And we are joined by Erika, Gabby, Melanie, Julian, and Brett. And in this conversation, we are going to talk about personal responsibility. Most people listening probably will have heard at some point, certainly if you're an ecologist, that personable responsibility is also nice, but personal responsibility breeds personal empowerment. So with that in mind, I'm going to open it up to the group to discuss. And at what point do we find, perhaps if we're working in groups with colleagues, that if you are having to encourage someone, lead someone to grow themselves, that if you weren't holding their hand and you weren't walking them through a process, that they would potentially stop and plateau at the level to which you had helped them arrive. So I'm going to throw that to start with to Erika.
So what's the question exactly? At what point do I realize, or
you can tackle it as what point do you realize? You could also tackle it as, is there wasted energy in trying to carry somebody along if they're not seeking it out for themselves?
So the point that I recognize it is when I realize I'm caring more about something than the person who's actually involved in it is. Like, I can't care more about your life or your decisions or how you are in something or, experiencing something than you do. So that's the point that I realize that I'm doing more than whoever, and they're not taking responsibility for their own decisions, their own choices, the own results or outcomes of whatever it is that they're choosing to do. And goes hand in hand with boundaries, right? Like, you have to know what your boundaries are around not enabling and dragging someone through something they say is important to them, but they're not taking any actions of their own to do. So for me, it's noticing that and then realizing the energy that I'm expending doing that and the frustration that I'm feeling over seeing a lack of production or change of behavior in another person.
Thank you. Julian, I'm going to come to you. When does inclusivity and empowerment become over support and perhaps rescuing?
So I think that goes goes back to the boundary topic, kind of like, where do we put the limit there? And being inclusive, it's important, but of course there's a need of limits. And sometimes when we add too much people or not the right people, it's becoming a burden that's blocking us to evolve, that's blocking everybody for your team, that will drag all the team down. And also I see that we can also see that in a perspective of respect and respect the time of everybody. Maybe the person that doesn't really want to involve with their own responsibility, they losing their time too. So sometimes we can like feel like, oh, I'm gonna help them or not, but it's self-respect for everybody in both ways also, I think.
Yeah, I love what Julian and Erika said. And I think for me, the realization is that sometimes I used to do that in the really early days, like in my 20s or 30s. And it took me a while to actually become a doer. And I'm wondering, is this because it's cultural in our upbringing, in the school system, university, learning your job, that you're not encouraged to actually take responsibility? Because you're always told what to do, don't you? You're told by your parents what to do. You're told by your teachers what to do. You go to university. A lot of people start struggling there because you have to start taking more self-responsibility in learning and in starting to do your own projects. And a lot of people I saw in uni struggling because they're simply didn't know what to do because they never learned to take responsibility for their own actions. And then we start a job, we're told by the company what they need us to do. It's very rare to find even leaders or managers in company who actively encourage people to step out and take responsibility. So I think because of that, most of us are consumers rather than givers. And that's, I think, is the difference between taking and waiting for somebody, you know, telling you what you need to do and actually taking active steps yourself. And the problem with that is, of course, as Julien said, if you have a lot of people who are just sitting there waiting to be told what to do, they're starting to track the team down because you don't have enough people bringing them along. It's too tiring for everybody else. Has to do with communication at all. I was in plenty of teams where the leaders were never clear what we actually are trying to achieve in the end. But we're just giving tasks. And it's very frustrating if you're given tasks and it's very stressful, but you don't even know really why you're doing it.
You raise an interesting point because it's often, university is often seen as a rite of passage and where people set their foundations for what they go on to be as an independent adult. But we've gone by that time through a whole education system that is still predicated to producing a workforce. And then there seems to be this element of surprise that people don't show initiative, they're not creative, which reminds me of the Ford experiment that looked at genius. You know, at 4 years old, 96% are geniuses. By the time they've been to university, we're down to only 4% within the criteria that they were using, because it's been kind of beaten out of us by that point. So bearing in mind what we've said about mutual respect, boundaries, and how we become conditioned to consuming, which obviously is good for economies and the like, how do we create or recreate, forget, unlearn, and then relearn the things that make us inspirational go-getters? And I'm going to come to Melanie.
Thank you, Alec. I think one word that Gabby used was clarity. So I think if we can explain it and be very clear on what it is we're trying to achieve and what the person's role is towards that goal, so that they can feel that where their area of responsibility is. Because like you say, people aren't used to, you know, taking on responsibility. So I think if we need to be very, very clear that, you know, this is what we're trying to achieve. This is the end goal. And questioning their why, you know, so, you know, why are you interested in working with us to this goal kind of thing, because it links back to the previous podcast where we talked a lot about passion. Sometimes, yeah, we can drag people along with us, but sometimes we have to question, you know, why, you know, if they're not coming of their own accord, if they're not wanting to take on some responsibility, then, you know, maybe they're in the wrong place. Maybe they would be better off, you know, doing something else, or, you know. So I think for me, I think clarity is the first step towards helping them understand, you know, why they're there. Because I think, you know, once we've got the why, then we can build the rest around that.
Absolutely. And, you know, the why has been part of previous conversations, as you identified. And it's, if you don't have a why, sometimes you can see things that you recognize as valuable, and for a period, it might serve oneself and others to be in alignment with something, to put energy into supporting somebody else's projects. But Brett, you've been in industry, you've been in education. Where do you see the whole conversation about personal responsibility and personal empowerment?
I think there's a piece of modeling for somebody, that leadership piece and explaining some, I guess, going through your own process, sharing it, communication, right? And actually having that time of, if you're working alongside somebody, right, just really dropping in with them and explaining what's going on and what makes a successful person, you know, especially if you're working with somebody who's younger, it's just getting into, say, a trade, or even in a teaching scenario, you're working usually with younger, and explaining what's important and what does it feel like for you, and just getting their feelings on that, and then you sharing what it feels like when you're being the doer and you're doing it. And then somebody, you know, when you're having a hard time, and say me and Julian were working on something, and I explained something to a point where I'm having a hard time, and all of a sudden I turn around and there's Julian with what I need, because he's now stepping into the doer role, right? And when everybody starts stepping into that doer role, right, things get done fast, smooth, efficient. So there's something special about sharing what it is and the meaning behind it for you, and just how things go easy. Yeah, there's just something special about the connection piece for me. Whether it's one person or if you're in charge of a crew, right, or a classroom, right? You can be just the one of 30. Are you going to get all 30? Well, you're going to get a couple and you're going to see, right? And are you going to drag those others along, like somebody shared, right? Do you have to drag them along? Or can you have a kind conversation and ask if everything's okay? Because maybe something's really going on behind the scene, right? And say, okay, I hear that, and I'll be here for you at such and such time, but can you support me in this right now? This is where I need you right now, and then I can be with you on that after, if you're looking to get something accomplished. Yeah.
It's interesting. It raises that conversation that some of us had with Kane Ramsey recently in Ecology, where he was talking about 30, 60, and 90 percenters. And we meet people through life who fit into these brackets. 30 percenters may remain there regardless of how much effort and opportunity you offer them. One or two may self-generate motivation that takes them into that 60% kind of bracket. And then with the right guidance, modeling support, they can potentially go on and become 90 percenters themselves, which is probably the most empowering and role modeling kind of way that we could see that work. I'm going to come to you, Julian. A humble, modest man who I know has had millions of pounds turnover businesses, tens of thousands of people come to live trainings with him. A guy who actually is on probably a different level to some of the people you work with quite regularly within various groups that you're involved with. How do you identify those people that are on that cusp of either going from 30 to 60 or 60 to 90% of empowered creators?
Good question. I think it's come with experience. With the time, it's not like we're not born with it, kind of, and especially like being able to recognize it or to becoming it, you know, is a process. And when we want to get together do words, I think it's just maybe, as we said a bit earlier, so you just filter it and you just see who show up consistently. Because like there is also like those people that are really excited at the beginning, and after one or two events, they just, you know, like vanish and they disappear quite kind of. So I think like for me, it's just like with time. It just take a little bit of time. There's like not doers that want everything. The people are not good doer and consistent. They just want everything fast, get quick, get rich quick, and all that stuff. So just take your time, and that will filter stuff most of the time.
A self-actualized person is able to commit to long-term projects. It's very easy to be drawn along by exciting new ventures. There's a whole reason we've got that phrase, joining the bandwagon. Probably the earliest examples of people being motivated by a charismatic speaker. For what purpose? To sign up to join a military campaign and then probably march off to their deaths, but being cheered on by the people of their towns and villages because of the work of this charismatic motivational leader. It then becomes important for the person to actually have the strength of character and the vision of purpose to be able to follow through with whatever the bright and shiny thing that caught their attention was. Julien.
Yeah, if I can add to my answer from your question about how to spot doers, I think there is what you can look for. It's a strong why, because generally that helps. You know, if you don't have a strong why, you will not move on. If I have to hire someone like this, I will check if they have a track record of growth mindset. I think that's a really common point of everybody that are really doing things. If you have a strong why and a growth mindset, it's probably a good fit.
I mean, we're probably getting ready to wrap up this recording in a little bit, and I just wanted to say that, you know, personal responsibility just basically means we're responsible for our own lives, right? Our behaviors are a direct result of the decisions that we make in life. So being responsibility, if you break up the word, it just really means you have the ability to choose how you are going to respond to anything, an invitation, an opportunity, anything at all. So personal responsibility is just basically deciding who do I want to be, right? What behaviors do I want to have, and what am I going to choose to do to accomplish that?
Yeah, that's really interesting, Erika. And that brings us actually straight into what we need first, and it's self-awareness. What do we actually want? Julien mentioned our why. We won't be able to see our why if we're not self-aware and we don't know our values. Because how often do we jump on a bandwagon because it sounds great and we don't want to miss out? But in the end of the day, we think of, oh, what can I get out of it? Rather than, oh, I have to do hard work, and do I really want to do it? Or am I only doing it because it sounds like a lovely shiny object and I really don't have that much interest in it in the first place? Really, if I'm really honest with myself. So yeah, that's my last thoughts.
I mean, personal responsibility ties hand in hand with accountability for me. It's deciding how I want to be, and if I'm really interested or wanting to do something, saying what I mean and meaning what I say, doing what I say I'm going to do, and then holding myself accountable to that. That's in a nutshell what personal responsibility means to me.
Melanie, closing thought.
Yeah, I'd just say that I think what Gabby was saying about having that self-awareness, once we have that self-awareness and we're able to self-reflect, then we're able to take that into relationships we have with other people, and that can improve our understanding of other people. And then we're more aware of, why is it that, this person's maybe not, as enthusiastic as we thought they might be. What steps can I take to encourage them, or, give them that little bit of inspiration, so that perhaps, they can get that personal responsibility as well. So I think that it starts with us, and then, we can then, radiate that out into to the people around us.
Great, thank you. Brett?
Yeah, responsibility, accountability is really key points. And so many key points here. The why, it starts with the why. Like if it's just to make money, right? Could be your why, but it's got to be deeper and have more meaning behind it. When there's more meaning and it's deeper, that's going to give you more drive. So it's connecting to those other pieces. Yeah. And that's my piece.
Thanks, Brett. Thank you all for tuning in to episode 4 of the Wi-Fi Chats. We will be putting links to connect to all of the people you've heard speaking into the publication of this episode, and you'll be able to contact anybody through those means. Thanks for tuning in. Stay tuned for episode 5, where we're going to talk about the traps that we create for ourselves in life.